In the last couple lectures, we've talked about police discretion and some of the issues arising from it. And the main one we've talked about, or the main sort of police discretion we've talked about in the last few lectures, are that the police can choose whether or not to enforce certain laws, right? These so-called malum prohibitum laws, stuff involved with drug laws and traffic laws and some other stuff, but those are the big ones we've been talking about. In this lecture, I want to go more deeply into those issues and talk about some criticisms of discretion, some more on top of what we talked about in the last lecture. But I also want to talk about, something else we might mean by police discretion. And that is that the police are allowed to actually break the laws and to have other people, informants, break the laws in investigations. Hunt, who we'll talk about more this lecture, his name's come up a few times in the last couple lectures. We'll talk more about Hunt. Hunt's worried about police discretion generally, just that they can choose when to enforce the law and not. But what he's even more worried about than that under discretion is that the police can actually break the laws. So we'll talk about that and go more deeply into Hunt's worries. The biggest worry Hunt has, or one of the biggest worries Hunt has about both police choosing when to enforce the laws and police being able to break the laws, is that it's contrary to the rule of law. One of the features of liberalism I talked about was the rule of law. Hunt thinks that police discretion sits very uneasily with this, maybe doesn't even fit with this. So remember, rule of law is that officials are bound by a set of rules they have to follow. Well, why is this important for liberalism? Let's talk about why this is important. Then we'll go a bit more deeply into why police discretion doesn't fit with it. Equality is part of it, right? Remember, liberalism is based on this idea that in some sense people are and should be equal before the law. So nobody, part of that is nobody is above the rules. And part of that is rules are important because rules are one of the ways that you make sure similar cases are treated in a similar way, right? That sort of fair treatment is essential to the equality part of liberalism. So the rule of law ties back to this liberal concern for equality. But rules are also just important for limiting the power of officials. And it's important that the power of officials be limited because of what domination. We want to limit the power of officials. Liberal forms of government are very skeptical of giving officials too much power. If you guys read the Bill of Rights, and especially if you read the history of the Bill of Rights, that was one of the concerns, giving the government, giving officials too much power. We want these rules that limit that. Well, why is that? One of the worries about giving officials too much power is that they can dominate people. And this concept of domination I want to talk a little bit about in this lecture because it will come up again when we talk about Anderson's thought on why a lot of workplaces are bad. Domination will be very important, so I think it's worth raising the concept here. So what domination means is that the other person can make you do what they want. And it goes beyond that. Not only can they make you do what they want, if you don't do what they want, there's a huge cost to you and almost none to them, right? They can push you around and there's not much you can do about it. Look, it's obvious why domination is bad, right? Just in and of itself, it's not good if other people can make you do what you want, even if you don't want to do it, right? And if you think a bit more about the rationale behind liberal government, behind liberalism, I think we can get more deeply into why domination's bad, right? Liberal government is supposed to respect people's freedom, their ability to make their own choices. If you are dominated, you are not making your own choices. The other person is making choices for you, right? And look, you can see all of these worries in the informant case, right? When they talk about Tiber, they go into some detail there, and they talk about other informant cases where even worse things happen at the end, right? The power of officials just isn't limited. They are treating different cases differently. We'll talk about that more in a second. You are treated differently by the law depending on how useful you are to them, not on what you've done, right? That doesn't fit this idea of equality or fairness that's so important to liberal forms of government. It also, you can see that the officials can dominate these people, right? Tabor doesn't want to do this. He doesn't want to spy on these people. He doesn't think that, they're doing the right thing here, but they can make him do it almost to the extent that he almost flunks out of college, right? I mean, he does flunk out of college and then he has to go back to another one. Think of the other cases. These people are made to do some really terrible, demeaning things. In some cases, they're put into horribly dangerous positions, right? They talked about a couple of informants at the end who were killed. So, police and others can very much make informants do what they want with these sorts of deals, right? The informants, the police send these people in, they're told to break the law in pursuit of some end for the police. If they offer you a deal, in a very real sense, they almost own you, right? But again, it's fundamentally unfair. The punishment you get, whether you just go flat to jail or whether you work as an informant or whatever, is based on your usefulness, not what you've done. Your punishment should be based, if we're treating people equally, it should be based on what you've done, not on how useful you might be to the police or other officials. And so Hunt takes this a step further. He says, well, look, not only is this unfair, not only are people dominated, but when you put these things together, this means that people, especially informants, are used as mere means. They are used as a mere means to the ends of the police and other officials in law enforcement, like the DA, right? Hunt goes a little further, and he says this thing that I think sounds weird, but when we get more deeply into punishment in the next few lectures, after we finish up the stuff on police discretion, I think we'll see it's not that weird. Hunt says that, these so-called queen for a day deals, immunity or informant deals, they violate someone's right to punishment. You're going to say, well, that's the weirdest right I've ever heard. You have a right to punishment. But this is what Hunt has in mind with it. The state should punish you because of what you've done. If we take fairness seriously, you have a right to be punished for what you've done and in accordance with what you've done. The state can't punish you because it's useful. We'll talk a lot more about this at the end of the unit when we talk about punishment, but Hunt will say, look at the line we've crossed. There is a fundamental difference between doing something to somebody because they've earned it, because they've deserved it, and doing it to them because it's useful, because threatening them with this, or doing it to them will be useful to the state. When you cross that line, Hunt is saying you are using them as a mere means. And Hunt is, I think, a very good Kantian on this. He'll say, look, you can't use people as a mere means, even if they are, in a sense, I hesitate to say bad people, but even if they've done something bad, they are still a human being deserving of respect. And even if you are trying to use them to accomplish good ends, well, remember, Kantianism says you can't use someone as a mere means even to good ends. So we'll go a bit more deeply into this next lecture. I'll say a bit more, some of the problems, just wrapping up with discretion, some of the issues it's raised. And then in the last few lectures in the unit, we'll talk more about these issues of punishment that are already coming up in this discussion.